Serious. What is the most paranormal or unexplainable event you've witnessed? Story 1. A few years ago, about a year after we moved into our house, my mom and I were home alone with our dog. I was in one bedroom and my mom was in another right across the hall. I heard my dog's toy squeaking down at the end of the hall, so I figured she was playing with it. No big deal. Then my dog came running into the bedroom without a toy, but the squeaking continued. My dog was running around like crazy, in and out of the bedrooms as if she were trying to figure out where the squeaking was coming from. I figured my mom was teasing her, trying to get her to play. It continued for a few minutes, and my dog was getting crazier and crazier until my mom called across the hall for me to stop squeaking the damn toy. You're making the dog crazy. So I stepped into the hallway and said, I don't have the toy. I thought you were squeaking it. At this point, the squeaking had stopped and we were both freaked out, standing right next to each other with the dog sitting between us. We looked down the hallway and the toy was sitting there, nothing touching it. Suddenly, it started squeaking like crazy, as if someone were jumping up and down on it. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up, and I was frozen in place. My mom almost started crying. The energy was just so weird, I couldn't even explain it. It turns out the previous owners had a dog that passed away in the house and told my parents that the ghost of the dog comes around from time to time. Now, I've always been iffy about the existence of ghosts, but I swear that a ghost dog was playing with my dog's toy. I wouldn't be terrified. It seems like that good boy just wanted to play. Story 2. One day I was with my friends, and suddenly my head started getting heavy and my vision began to widen out to the point where I couldn't see anything at all. I immediately thought that someone could have knocked me out and asked my friends to help me walk to a place where I could get some air and sit down. My sight was coming back, but I couldn't speak or express anything. I couldn't respond or answer what my friends were asking. Somehow I got into a trance, and it felt like I was seeing my surroundings from an out-of-body perspective. My friend called my mom and she picked me up. I still couldn't respond until I got home and went to the bathroom. 3 days later, my mom received a call from my grandpa and I immediately knew what was going on. He told her that my dad had passed away and was found in his bathroom. I live with my mom and my dad used to live in another state. The forensic report showed that he passed away on that exact date, probably around the moment I'd had that episode. They say that when you pass away, your soul reaches out to your loved ones. Story 3. I didn't see a ghost until a couple of years ago, and I did not believe in them until then. I had the mentality that I'll believe it when I see it. I was at my friend's rental house, who had a baby, and they kept talking about how their house was haunted, particularly the room the baby slept in, and that a woman in white would be seen walking into the baby's room at night. A few times, my friend would be alone with the baby at night while the wife was at work and see the woman walk by the open door in the hallway towards the baby's room while the baby slept. He didn't think anything of it at first because he thought it was his wife, and he would remember she was at work and immediately go to the baby's room, only to find the kid crying and no one was there. Fast forward to my encounter. I was hanging out with my friend's wife at their house while my friend was at work and helping out with watching the baby. I started hearing a lot of noises. My friend's wife said she just wanted to get the baby, get in the car, and leave. I laughed and tried to tell her it was nothing, but I complied. We got to the car, and she told me she forgot the dog and asked if I could go back and get him. I approached the windows at the front of the house, peered into it, and saw the dog standing at the sliding glass door, completely stiff with its tail pointing straight out, barking uncontrollably. I then looked at the reflection, and my heart skipped several beats as I saw the bottom half of a reflection of a woman in white. I noped out of there, told her I couldn't go in there, and told her what I saw. We eventually went back inside once the dog slowed his barking. I have been a true believer in ghosts since those days, and I've had a couple of other encounters with them. Story 4. When I was in high school, my younger brother and I shared a bedroom. His bed was on one side of the room and mine was on the other. My brother was an avid sleepwalker and would also talk in his sleep all the time. Sharing a bedroom with him was unsettling at first, but I eventually got used to it. One night at about 3 a.m., I suddenly woke up from a deep sleep, instantly alert. I had this urge to look towards my brother's bed. I felt a presence in the room. When I turned my head, I saw a tall, skinny, shadowy, or human-like figure, and I was reaching its hands down toward my sleeping brother's face. Its hand got maybe an inch away before its head jerked to the side and looked at me, staring at it, frozen. The shadow then faded and moved up into the air, vanishing through the ceiling. I would describe the figure as being about 6.5 feet tall. It was skinny, with thin limbs and fingers twice as long as normal, and had a slight hunch. If I had to label it by gender, it resembled a man. It appeared almost 2D, like it didn't have any shape or form. No eyes, no face. It was actually slightly transparent and made absolutely no noise. I looked straight at it for about 3 seconds before it noticed me looking and very quickly faded upwards and disappeared. Immediately, my brother shot up out of bed, stood and walked to the light switch. He turned it on and looked at me. In a very calm and solemn voice, he says, "Did you feel it?"
Did you feel the hand? He then turned off the light and went back to his bed. I hid under my covers the rest of the night. My brother doesn't remember any of it. And yes, other creepy stuff has happened in that house. The story is the most interesting. One odd thing about that bedroom was that my dad and I had to replace the carpet when we first moved in. Under the old one, we found a manhole cover and lifted it up to see a very deep, dark pit. The house was old, and we think at some point there used to be a well there. The bedroom was built over it. I know some of you are skeptical of ghosts and the paranormal, but this story where multiple people experienced the same thing made you feel uneasy, didn't it? Seeing something unexplainable might scare you off, but what if something unexplainable happened to you the way it did the guy in Story 6? How would you feel? Story 5. I work in a prison. Before my job in the jail changed, I used to have about an hour and a half of downtime before it was time to punch out. My sergeant at the time asked if I would cover the 11 p.m. count on one of the blocks. I didn't care what I did before or after, I just had to do the count. I didn't have any problems with it, so I said okay. I was sitting in our Times Square area. One hallway leads to 4 blocks and another hallway leads to the other 4. I'm sitting in front of one of those hallways. I heard someone walking towards me from behind, but I realized I didn't hear keys. We all have keys, except inmates. I turned around, no one was there. I think, okay, maybe I just imagined it. The guy sitting in the area with me asked who it was. I guess I didn't imagine it. All right then. 11 p.m. came. I went to the block. No one was letting me in. What the hell? I went back to the Times Square area to call and let the officer know not to panic. I was coming. I just couldn't get in. As I was on the phone, I felt someone behind me and they leaned into my ear and whispered forcefully, "What are you doing?" I waved my hand back to signal for them to stop. I hung up and turned to yell at whoever it was. No one was there. No one was in any hallway. I was all alone. Another story I remember is that we have an officer in the MHU control room who saw a shadow person on camera. There's a hallway, and on one side there is a door with no windows that you have to be buzzed into. This leads down to MHU. Across the hall and about a foot over, there's a door with a big window in the top half. That door leads to our disciplinary area. There are a few office doors and hearing rooms in the hallway, and it opens up to a big desk area. There's another locked door leading into the disciplinary office. Anyway, if you're in MHU, you have cameras on all 8 inmates. A camera at the door leading to the stairs and elevator, and a camera that shows you upstairs where the elevator and stairs land. Then the outside of the door you get buzzed into. So one midnight shift, the dude looked up the cameras and noticed movement in the window of the disciplinary door. It's not entirely weird, since there is a sergeant's office there, but Central gave him no trip calls that a higher up was in the area. He called to double check and no. So no one should be in there. He's still watching and can see the shadow standing there. Then he moves away and comes back, but it's more to the side, like trying to look down the hall without opening the door. This went on for a few minutes. The other officer he's with saw it too, so in order to rule out anything, they got the roundsman to check it out. No one was in there. Fun fact, our disciplinary area used to be our infirmary. Quite a few inmates passed away there, and a lot were victims of related complications. We used to have a lieutenant who, on his first midnight shift as our watch commander, heard moaning and groaning coming from there. As soon as he stepped into the area, he felt like something was in there that was going to hurt him. After making sure no one was there, he got out of there. He refused to go in there ever again. If he had disciplinary during the day, he made sure to never be alone in the offices. Story 6. It happened to me 7 years ago, and I can't figure it out, but I lost an hour in what felt to me like minutes. At the time, I was working from home after a serious illness diagnosis. I'd settled into a routine, up at 7 a.m. and was doing homework and showering. Then at 8 a.m., I'd start preparing my work and laying out my day. Phone calls and emails are from 8 to 9. This is all I remember. It was 7:55 and I brewed a cup of Keurig coffee in my kitchen, located in the main floor of my house. I went upstairs to my office, turned on my computer to settle in, and realized I'd forgotten the coffee in the kitchen. I went back downstairs and got the coffee as soon as I realized I'd forgotten it. It couldn't have been more than the time it took Windows to boot up, but I took a sip and the coffee was cold. Not warm, but actually cold. I thought my Keurig was broken, but I looked at the clock and it said 9:14. So whereas I expected it to be 8:05 max, somehow an hour and 10 minutes passed without explanation. It was very bothersome. I have no idea where that hour went. I'd never had a blackout before or since, there'd been no seizures, and the medications I was on shouldn't have caused a lapse like that. I don't think I fell asleep because I distinctly remember typing my password and saying out loud, "Crap, I forgot the coffee." It kind of left me uneasy for a bit. Nothing like that had ever happened to me before or since. Story 7. I work with donated human tissue. We process stuff for transplant. The controlled area where we process those definitely has weird things happening in it. Small stuff like repeated or inexplicable equipment failure, tools falling off flat surfaces, and sometimes the tissue itself will react strangely to processing, i.e. a young donor whose tissue will fall apart or exhibit other poor dispositions for one reason or another. Sometimes a donor will have so many problems with their processing that it just feels like they do not want their former body parts to be transplanted. I've definitely gotten strange vibes while working. I'm not saying that they're knowingly or purposefully haunting us, but there is an energy that is hard to deny. If some of those donations were stolen, I wouldn't be surprised if there weren't any angry ghosts haunting their stolen parts. Are you terrified yet? Or do you want more? If you do, then hit the like button and subscribe to my channel to continue the Goosebumps Fest. Story 8. I have a couple. The first one was when my ex passed away. I had a baby daughter with him at the time, but we didn't live together. The night he passed, I heard someone walking into the bedroom where my daughter was, and I very clearly heard his voice talking to her. I called out, thinking he may have come in through the back, but no one answered. I found out the next day that he passed sometime during the night, probably around the time I heard the voice. The second one happened at the last place I lived. It's nothing terribly spooky, but I rented a townhouse and found out that in my daughter's room there was an attic access. I was stoked because that meant I could store my Christmas decorations up there. I got a kitchen chair to open it up, but I couldn't. Not physically because it was easy to open. Something mentally stopped me from doing it. I had a huge fear. So I left it alone. Sometimes I'd get eerie feelings, but I chalked it up to being the first place I've lived alone in a while. 2 years at that point, but I don't get those feelings in my new apartment at all. I found out from my neighbor not too long after the attic incident that the guy who lived there before me was a raging alkie and ended himself in the house, in my daughter's room. Story 9. I don't remember this, but my mother always tells me this story. Before I was born, my grandpa had a dream that he was playing soccer with me. My grandpa had brain cancer and was already in the hospital. After I was born, he met me for the first and last time. Again, he told my mother about his dream. 2 weeks later, he passed away. Fast forward 2 years and I was in a club with my parents. It was lunchtime, so my mother asked the nanny to get me for lunch. She came back and said, "He said he wouldn't come. He said that he was busy." My mother, "Busy? Doing what?" Nanny, "Playing soccer with his grandpa." Immediately, my mother looked over the balcony. The soccer field and one of the goals were right beneath it. She saw me kicking the ball into the goal and screaming, "Catch it, Grandpa, catch it!" She cried so much, and still does every time she tells me this story. Story 10. After my dad passed away, my stepmother kept asking me if I had found the book he was reading in his last months. She didn't know the title. We looked all over the house for it. Eventually, we found it with a stack of magazines. Definitely not where it belonged in the house. My stepmother recognized it immediately when it was found. The title of the book was Hello from Heaven. They also received a phone call 2 days after he passed away. The phone call was from his phone number. For some reason, I was too scared to answer. I asked the only person who had the phone, my stepmother, if she had called from it. She said she left it in the garage where he always worked. This was 14 years ago. I still regret not answering the phone. Story 11. I used to live in a town that was pretty strange altogether, but the house was even more so. Most of my elder family members who grew up there also have had weird experiences. I remember one time when I got up to use the toilet, the bathroom was next door, which was across the way from my bedroom, and I kid you not, a woman in a full vintage nurse's outfit came running out of the bathroom with a washcloth and into my bedroom. I have no idea if there used to be a sick person who lived in the house years ago, but the house was very old. That is the good side of it, though. There's a lot more. You'd even sit there sometimes and have this awful feeling of bad presence, as if somebody were staring at you. Eyes burning into your soul kind of feeling, you know? Freaky stuff. Story 12. It must have been some kind of hallucination, but it really scared me. I was sitting in bed watching YouTube for a couple of hours. I got up and reached forward to set something on my nightstand or whatever. I had this strange, indescribable feeling that I hadn't actually moved from where I was sitting at all. I quickly turned around and looked at where I was sitting seconds before, and there I was, still sitting there. I was outside my body. I could see the shocked, horrified expression come to my face at such a strange sight. I quickly sat back down right in the same spot, and nothing strange happened again. If that had happened to you, but your other body was smiling back at you, would you still look at yourself in the mirror ever again? Story 13. On the day my father passed away, I was alone in the apartment we lived in while everyone was out mourning at my uncle's. I stayed home because I didn't want people to stare at me sobbing. Anyway, I was in the living room and I heard footsteps in my mother's room, which has a balcony. I heard the balcony door open, so I started sobbing and shouting, asking who was there. I went to check it out and there was no one there except a strong smell of tobacco in the room. My father used to smoke on the balcony. I never told anyone about it and just kept it to myself. Later, I learned that my mother got blamed for my dad's passing, even though they loved each other since they were teens and my dad was simply a victim of cancer, and a massive brawl broke out. So I just thought of it as my dad coming home because he couldn't be bothered to hear people arguing. Story 14. About 5 years ago, my husband and I went to visit his grandma. She lives in a big, beautiful 2-story house. I was going to head upstairs to put some pajamas on while I saw a woman walk across the top of the stairs. It was only my husband, young daughter, and his grandma in the house, and whoever I saw wasn't Granny. I went into the living room and told him what I saw, and his grandma said, Yeah, that's Lori. She visits a lot. Lori was my husband's mom, but had passed away when he was young. I was so spooked after that. I barely slept the rest of the time we were there. Story 15. When I was a kid, my parents told me that I said a lot of weird stuff. Once, I was at a bonfire staring into the sky, and when my mom asked what I was looking at, I said, "The ladder from the heaven is coming down for the lady down the road." My mom laughed it off then, but that night the lady down the road passed away. My mom was shocked. I also had a dream about my great-great-grandmother. I told my great-grandma that she loved her. My great-grandma asked me to describe her, and I perfectly did. And I even picked her out of a photo album. Finally, right after my other grandma passed, I was walking down the stairs of her house when I saw her in the corner. I remember this vividly because I wasn't very close to this grandma, and I was so freaked out, but it was like I was in a trance. I ended up falling down the stairs. It made me wonder because she didn't like my sister and me very much. Sometimes, the dead can be as mischievous as when they were alive, scaring the living just for kicks. Story 16. When I was younger, I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange man's voice. I couldn't understand what he was saying because he was talking really fast, but at one point I heard it say my brother's name, and then it started laughing maniacally. My dad heard it too and came running into my room and turned the lights on. No one was there. There's absolutely no explanation. Another time I woke up in the middle of the night and heard what sounded like a cult gathering right outside my window. It was like 3 a.m., and I could just very clearly hear a group of people singing and chanting while a baby wailed. After about 10 to 20 minutes, it suddenly stopped. Story 17. Mine is not crazy scary, but it is true. I was in the living room with my grandma. We were the only ones at home. She was working on a crossword puzzle, and I was messing around on my iPad. The TV was off and the windows were closed. All of a sudden, as clear as day, I heard my name being whispered. But since it was so quiet, it sounded loud. I looked up at my grandma, thinking it was her, asking her if she said something. She said, "No, but I heard your name." I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy What's the most paranormal thing you've seen? Story 4 is so wild. See you on that video.